Could be a sprain, could be a broken bone, who knows? Cut it off. There's an old saying, find a job you love and you'll never work a day in your life. But there's another old saying as well. Find the thing you love and let it kill you. Well, the protagonist in this week's movie did a little from column A and a little from column B. We're going to be talking about Radioactive on this week's Everyman Movie Review. Hey everybody, and thank you for joining me for yet another episode of the Everyman Movie Review. This week we're going to be talking about the Amazon original Radioactive, the story of Marie Curie. Although she's not Marie Curie throughout the entire movie, but we'll get to that in a bit. We are, of course, back to movie reviews, and that means back to our regular schedule. That means I'll tell you a little bit about the people in the movie, I'll tell you a little bit about the movie, and then at the end I'll have my recommendation on whether or not this movie is worth your time. So if you don't know anything about Marie Curie, I can tell you that the story by itself is amazing. This is a woman who, at a time when women were doing not a lot, basically just being housewives and mothers, said, I'm not going to do that. I want to be a scientist. I'm going to be a scientist. And with her partners, eventually discovered new elements. She discovered new ways to use those elements. She discovered new technology. And all of that is wrapped up in the movie Radioactive. But before we get too far in, let's get through the pleasantry, shall we? Radioactive was directed by Marjane Satrapi. It was written by Jack Thorne. And it's based on the book by Lauren Redniss. It is starring Rosamund Pike as Marie Curie, Yvette Furrer as Carla, Sam Riley as Pierre Curie, Simon Russell Beale as Professor Lippmann, Alexis Lantham as Gerard, Charles Tunbridge as Peter, Peter Funkensaal as Heinrich, and Paul Albertson as Tibbets. Now I have to say, I was fascinated by the story of Marie Curie long before I saw this. So this may be one of those movies that isn't for everyone. If you're not into science really, you might be bored because a lot of this is about how science developed. But it's also about a woman who was ahead of her time and who refused to be a woman just like the other women in her time period. Marie Curie was once known as Maria Skłodowska. She was a Polish refugee who had moved to France at the turn of the century, that century being the 20th century, early 1900s. And once in France, she tried to acclimate as best she could. She changed her name from Maria to Marie, and she got into French society, kind of, as much as she could acclimate to get along with everyone. She was the only woman at the French National Laboratories or at the French National Academy who would be working there at all. She was the only woman who had her own lab. She was the only woman working on anything, and she stood out because of that. And nothing was ever exactly right for her. In a place where people shared laboratories and they had to share space, she felt as though her work was so important that it deserved its own space, and she didn't like other people invading hers. And come to find out, now we know now with the eye of history, she was absolutely right. But then Professor Lippmann, who headed up the academy, did not agree with her. And we start out the movie at the moment when she was almost ejected from the academy. But instead, she meets somewhat accidentally Pierre Curie. Now, spoiler alert, if you didn't know, there's going to be a love story involved between Maria/Marie and Pierre Curie, which is how she gets the name Marie Curie. But Pierre is also a difficult person at the National Academy. No one really wants to be in his laboratory. His students love him, and they think he's doing exciting work. And he thinks the same about Marie, and she actually thinks the same about his work. They're working on different things, but kind of in the same field, and he offers her some of his laboratory space if they can start working together to try and solve the problems that they're both kind of trying to figure out. Now, Marie is not one who likes to work with anyone, but she has no lab space now, and this seems like it's something that won't be too terrible. And of course, they strike up a social life along with their professional life, and we can see them start moving in the direction of a romance. Now, I'm not going to do a spoiler section for this movie. It's historical. So if you know anything about Marie Curie, you already know the whole story. If you don't, well, nothing I do is really going to spoil the movie for you. The heart of it is in how they portray these characters, not actually what may happen to them. So we're going to go through kind of the life and what she has to experience. But Marie starts working with pitch blende, which is basically ore and rock tossaways. They take out the gold or whatever it is that they were mining the rock for. And what they found is what's left had some peculiar stuff left in it. And if you went through enough of it and processed it enough, you could find interesting elements inside. The most interesting, of course, is uranium. That's something that they knew about, although they didn't really understand it. And she thought she was looking for uranium, but she ends up finding something else. And in her work with Pierre, they end up discovering not one new element, but two new elements after going through tons and tons of pitchblende and gallons of water, hundreds of gallons of water, and so many chemicals, like 400 tons of chemicals. Just an amazing stuff, amazing time that it took. But they discover polonium and radium. And she's really famous for discovering radium, mainly because it's probably what killed her and definitely what killed her husband. But more important than the elements is that she discovered something about elements. Until then, we all thought that elements were stable, that there was uranium and it was always uranium. But what they discovered is that there is a natural radioactivity to some elements. What we know now from your basic science courses in high school, that electrons are always trying to reach stability, and that an element or a nucleus will give up neutrons, will give up electrons, will give up positrons in order to try to reach stability. This is natural radioactivity. And she discovered that it existed. And she did so with radium. Now, what she discovered is that radium gives off a glow, and that is a natural radioactivity. What she didn't know is that she was poisoning herself while she slept with her little bottle of radium next to her. And this was a huge discovery. It rocked the scientific world, and in fact, she and her husband were nominated for a Nobel Prize, although only he was named, and that caused a bit of a kerfuffle. So they won the Nobel Prize for physics for what they were working on in the lab. She would later be nominated for another Nobel Prize for chemistry for the continued work on that. And basically, the modern understanding of the world and how it works is based on her work. And while she was making such advanced scientific discovery, she was dealing with a lot of things in her personal life, like her husband getting sick mysteriously and not knowing why. Could be the radium. People using her discoveries for medical treatments, but finding out that maybe it would make people more sick than it did make them well. People using it during the spiritualist movement to try and call forth ghosts from the other side and accidentally poisoning themselves and killing themselves. And people turning it into weapons. There are several cutaways during the movie where essentially Marie Curie is looking over what would later become of her discovery, including, as I mentioned, Paul Tibbets is one of the characters, and we see him on the Enola Gay as they are about to drop an atom bomb on Hiroshima. Of course, the discovery of natural radioactivity and the way that cells break down made possible fission and eventually fusion bombs that the United States would drop on Japan. So radiotherapy, which, any cancer treatment, and atom bombs, and so many things in between are all thanks to Marie Curie. And Paul Curie, during his Nobel laureate speech, does make a mention that, Nobel discovered dynamite, and it's a substance that can be used to destroy in the hands of some men and to create in the hands of others. It can be used for good and bad. And he felt, and I think Marie felt, as though that was any discovery. But the fact that it could be used for bad doesn't mean we shouldn't push the boundaries of discovery. It just meant that it needs to be put in the right hands. In her case, she happened to live in France around World War I, which means there was a lot of bad that could be used for, and it was used for. And of course, the United States continued that work and decimated 2 Japanese cities with a bomb based on her work. But we also see that she used her knowledge for good. She had a natural fear, or an acquired fear, I guess not a natural one, of hospitals because her mother was sick when she was young and went to the hospital. Her mother asked for a kiss and said the kiss would cure her, and she died anyway. And Marie believed that hospitals were just bad and she would never go to one. But when the war effort called, when her daughter and the war effort called, she responded. She built mobile X-ray units to go out into the field to X-ray soldiers because at that time, the French in World War I essentially were doing what Americans were doing during the Civil War, and that's bullet in the foot, cut it off. Could be a sprain, could be a broken bone, who knows? Cut it off. Basically, amputation was the way to solve everything because the worst thing that could happen to you was to have gangrene set in. Because even antibiotics at that point were not necessarily widely used. We didn't really understand germs and all of that science yet. And so it would be better just to cut it off and not worry about dying horribly and slowly. Just save the person, lose the limb. But what Marie was able to do with her mobile x-ray vans is say, hey, it's not even broken. It's a sprain. He's good. Or to say, hey, there's a bullet. It's right here. Let's go in and pull it out. And that way we don't have to cut off the leg. And so French soldiers were able to return to the battlefield in numbers that hadn't been seen before in warfare. And in fact, if you look at American losses in our modern wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, you can see that battlefield medicine, which was essentially started by Marie Curie, and of course, all great scientists base their work on somebody else. She based her work on Florence Nightingale, who was a nurse who tried to help men on the battlefield, like get to them quicker and we can save lives. Marie said, get to them better while we're getting to them quicker and we could save lives. But the fact that we've lost so few soldiers in the fights in Afghanistan and Iraq can be based on the fact that battlefield medicine has come so far. Instead of just chalking up men to being lost, let's treat them here. Let's make sure that we can get them back in the battle. But the overarching tone of Radioactive is essentially that while she could get everything perfect about her professional life, or get it the way she wanted it anyway, whether or not it was perfect, her personal life just always escaped her. And she lost her husband. She became the subject of ridicule by the public. She fell out of favor with the government. She fell out of favor with high society. And basically was left as a really well-known person who nobody kind of liked. And I think if you were to ask Marie, she would have been fine with that. And Rosamund Pike plays her so well as a woman who just doesn't care what people think about her. She wants to do her work, and that's it. And the filmmakers here did such a great job of portraying it that way. It could have been more apologetic and made her like, oh, she feels bad about people not liking her. The real Marie did not, and Rosamund Pike played it as a woman who did not care. Now, this movie has a relatively long runtime. It's over 2 hours. I want to say it's about 2:20. And as I pointed out in previous reviews, life is kind of hectic right now. I don't know if you've heard, but I'm running for president. So I have all of that social media to keep up with. It's at Rob Cheek for Prez on all your social networks. I've been building the website for the campaign. I've also been keeping up on my personal social media at Robert N. Cheek on all your social networks, and my personal website, robertncheek.com, where you can find links to these videos and the books that I've written and all of my projects all in one place. I've been keeping up with the Everyman Movie review stuff and making sure that social media is up to date. You can find links to that down in the show notes below. And of course, the weekly podcast that I do with my buddy Corey, where we talk about news and politics and all sorts of stuff. That's Oh the Anthem, and you can find it at ohtheanthem.com and on Anchor and YouTube. So my time is at a premium, and this movie is absolutely worth it. Even if you're not as busy as me, but even if you are, sit down and take a look at this movie. If you know nothing about Marie Curie or Madame Curie or however you might know her, this movie will give you a shortened version and you'll understand everything about her life and why she is so important. It's one of those movies that can be entertaining and you feel as though it's just quality, a good movie, but you also come out of it having learned something important about history. And to me, those are the best kind of movies. If I can learn something and be entertained, it's 2 hours, 20 minutes well spent. And this movie really doesn't have a lot of trigger warnings. It's, if any of the stuff that I've talked about is really triggering to you, then it's probably not going to be for you. But otherwise, it's really just a story of one woman in her life and how important she is to history, even though maybe some people don't know about it. And if you don't know about it, I highly recommend you watch it. This is the movie that can make the difference. You may understand a lot more about the world around you just by watching this movie. So Radioactive gets a definite must-watch from me. Again, you might have to set aside a little extra time to watch it, and you really do need to pay attention. You have to have rapt attention on it, or else you will miss some very important things, and the later parts of the movie may not make sense. It's a lot like Palm Springs in that way, which was my last review, of course, but in a different way. Just to understand her and her life, you really need to know what happened before because it leads to what happens after. So make sure you're paying rapt attention to it. But I really think this movie is for everyone. You'll come out of it knowing way more than you did going in. So take the time to watch it. I did, even as hectic as my life is. And as you know, I'm keeping up with 2 episodes per week, Thursday and 1 episode in between. So make sure that you are subscribed to the channel and you hit the notification bell so that you know when the next episode is available for you to watch. I got a lot of great movies coming up in the next few weeks, so you're not going to want to miss any of them. But until then, make sure you take care of yourselves and each other. Have a great week, everybody.